Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this session of Susan Samueli Integrative Health Institute's research webinar series. My name is Jeff Dusek. I'm the Director of Outcomes Research at UCI Samueli Institute and Professor in Residence. I'm happy to moderate this session of today's research webinar series. We have some exciting guests today who will give a really good lecture. But before we start, I want to kind of go through some housekeeping. The session is being recorded. We'll send all registrants the link after the recording, so you have that. Everyone will be muted during the presentation to allow our awesome presenters to present without delay. And then please communicate with us, including any questions in the Q&A feature on the bottom of the screen. And we'll hold a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Just as a background, the Samueli Institute is committed to whole person health research, education, and clinical care. Our interdisciplinary teams are dedicated to exploring the science of disease and prevention and treatment. We'll bring this series to you to share the promising integrative health research that's occurring throughout the Institute's pilot studies grants and Samueli Scholar Awards. To date, the Institute has supported 25 investigations with the potential to enhance our understanding of integrative practices. For more information, please visit our website at sci-hi.uci.edu. So we are fortunate today. We've got two excellent speakers from Northeastern, as you can see on your screen. First of all, we have the 2021 and 2022 Samueli Pilot Study Awardee, Dr. Susanne Jaeggi. Did I pronounce that correctly? Okay, wonderful. A professor at Northeastern University, where she's affiliated with the Center for Cognitive and Brain Health in the departments of psychology, applied psychology, and music. She also co-directs the Brain Game Center for Mental Fitness and Wellbeing at the Sound Mind Collaboratory. Her research program focuses on understanding individual differences in working memory, executive functions related to cognitive domains, as well as their malleability across the lifespan using experimental and neuroscientific approaches. Because of the relevance of those cognitive domains in educational settings of daily life, her major work has focused on the development of assessments and interventions, and the extent to which working memory and executive functions can be improved with both experience and targeted training. She is particularly interested in understanding the underlying mechanisms of learning and cognitive training and determining for which individuals and populations this training is most effective and why. She received PhDs in cognitive psychology and neuroscience, as well as habilitation degree in psychology from the University of Bern in Switzerland, and she continued postdoctoral work in cognitive neurosciences at the University of Michigan. Her work has been funded by the NIH, including NIA, NIMH, NSF, IES, ONR, or the Advanced Education Research and Development Fund. Dr. Jaeggi presenting with Maria Vodyanyk. Vodyanyk, thank you. A PhD candidate at Northeastern University Psychology Department, where she's affiliated with the Great Center for Cognitive and Brain Health. She works with Dr. Jaeggi and Dr. Aaron Seitz, who co-directs the Brain Game Center for Mental Fitness and Well-Being and the Sound Mind Collaboratory. Her research focuses on the biopsychosocial benefits of art-based interventions, and her current work seeks to, number one, understand the perceptual and cognitive changes that occur with training in observational drawing, and two, implement digital arts-based interventions for individuals at risk for dementia. Beyond artistic training, she's interested in mind-body interventions at large and implications for integrative medicine and preventive sciences. She is interested in understanding how the arts and other activities that engage the aesthetic experience can promote successful development across the lifespan. She received her master's in education at the University of California, Irvine. Congratulations. A BS in neurobiology and arts student certificate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jaeggi and Ms. Vodyanyk. Take it away, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Dusek, and thanks so much for having us today. So we're really excited to be here, at least virtually being back at UCI. It's a little bit of a homecoming for us. And we're here to present the outcomes of one of the studies that was funded by the Susan Samueli Integrative Health Institute. We're very grateful for that. And this is right in time because now we really have the results to present here, which are part of Masha's dissertation work. Before we go into the study, Masha, if you could go to the next slide, let me give you a little bit of a background of what we do in our lab, especially at the Brain Games Center for Mental Fitness and Wellbeing that I co-direct at Northeastern University. And if people are interested in the QR code in the upper left, gives you a little bit of an overview of what we do here. So we develop game-like or game-based assessments that can be done on individuals' phones or tablets on computers to assess cognition across the lifespan. So anything from vision to hearing to higher cognitive functions. And beyond that, we also develop app-based interventions to promote these skills across the lifespan. And we are very happy to share tools with for researchers, but also for the general public. So we have tools on the App Store and Google Play for anyone who wants to use them or, again, collaborate them. Just reach out to us, and we're very happy to get involved with all of you. So without further ado, Masha, for the next slide. So one of the big focuses on our work has been focused on understanding the extent to which very targeted cognitive training might improve broader cognitive functions that reach beyond the very specific training domain that we're targeting. So on the illustration on the far left here is so often we rely on game-like interventions to target something like working memory skills or attention skills. And then we're interested in the extent to which that might transfer generalize to other domains that use these functions. So for example, problem-solving skills or other type of mathematical reasoning or visuospatial reasoning. And in the middle, you see the results of a meta-analysis that has been conducted a few years ago by one of my PhD students and then postdocs, Jaeggi, where we looked at a very specific type of cognitive training called the NBAC training that focuses on working memory skills. And then we looked at whether or not that might again, transfer and generalize to these types of problem solving or fluid intelligence skills as a result of training. And as you can see here with the blue bar here, these are individuals that underwent this type of NBAC training, working memory training for several sessions, typically about 3 or 4 week long intervention. And we see that they improve about a quarter of a standard deviation over and above some sort of a control group, often a business as usual control group, but also various types of active control groups. So the effect sizes are kind of small, so they're modest in many ways. So this is now a meta-analysis that focuses on young adults, which also is a little bit more difficult to maybe illustrate or demonstrate some of these effects, because typically young adults, they are performing very well in these types of tasks and just showing a little bit of an improvement as a result of these working memory training interventions is very difficult. But that has also contributed to some of these discussions around the extent to which these brain trainings or cognitive trainings are effective and in what populations and why. And if you're interested to learn more about some of the backgrounds and discussions and controversies around cognitive training, I provided a QR code there where we hosted a recent webinar series on the topic that was sponsored by the National Institute of Aging. And it has different talks and different perspectives from the major players in the field. That said, again, going back, so the effect sizes are often small, and it's quite difficult to also figure out in what backgrounds or what are some of the ingredients that make training work, or maybe some of the ingredients that makes it very hard to search some of these effects. And one of the features that we have been focusing on, Masha, if you could go to the next slide, are individual differences. So what we see in many of the studies across the boards that focus on these type of brain trainings, cognitive trainings, is that not everyone improves to the same degree. And that's maybe not super surprising. So if you see on the left, these are individual training curves, so improvements across time in older adults. And when you see the bigger line, the red line on the bottom, this is one individual who did improve over the course of training, but it sort of a little bit on the tail end, so had a very hard time with the training itself, as compared to the green line that's very steep on the left. That's maybe now a little bit hard to see here, but someone who showed quite marked improvements in training. And we are interested to understand what are some of the reasons why some individuals might benefit more or less from these training tasks, and what can we do in order to also make the training beneficial for them all. And on the right, it's an example of another from our PhD students from UCI, Irvine, who just defended her dissertation, using machine learning approaches to then distinguish different types of improvement patterns, and trying to predict very early on who might be improving and what we can do to further personalize the training in order to maximize outcomes. So these are some of the things that we're focusing on very specifically with these more narrowly targeted intervention that focus, for example, on working memory. So if you could go to the next slide, Masha. So what we have also been focusing on is maybe going beyond these narrower training, but also focus on other types of sensory inputs. So for example, not only training on verbal function or visual spatial function, but what if we capitalize on what is called multisensory facilitation effects, where we're combining the information across the different senses. And on the right, it's just an example to highlight there, is that when we implement these trainings using some of these multisensory inputs, we find more improvements that go beyond the training itself. So we find better effects, essentially, if we combine across different domains. And on the next slide is yet another example. So this time with kids, in which we are combining executive function, working memory type interventions with also more specific math functions. And the light blue bars here is just to illustrate when we're combining, so not just training either math or working memory, but combining them both, we see the most prominent effects, and especially also in the long run on the right side. So when you look at several months after training completion, we see the most sustained effects from these more multi-component or multi-domain interventions. And then if you can skip to the next slide again, Masha. So this is very much in line with not very recent, but a lot of the focus in the field, especially in the neuroscience and the medical field, when it comes to the investigation of these very multimodal multi-domain interventions. And the finger trial, which maybe some of you are familiar with, that has been started in Finland a few years ago, but it is now launched worldwide in Worldwide Finger, that focuses not just on cognitive type training or mental stimulation, as illustrated on the top here, but they also integrate other activities like social activities, activities that focus on improving cardiovascular health, nutrition, but also physical activities. These have shown to these more lifestyle, broader, holistic interventions have shown more promise than some of these more narrow interventions that I was showing you before. And Masha, if you can click on the next one. So this has also been highlighted in the latest report by the National Academies that I was a part of, in which we surveyed the potential of these types of interventions for preventing and treating Alzheimer's disease and related dementia, but also promote healthy cognitive aging. So again, interventions that are more focusing on lifestyle approaches and really trying to target multimodal approaches. Those seem to be a little bit more well, first of all, more broad, but they can also be more easily embedded by individuals and also might be a little bit more motivating in the long run. And now to the next slide. So that leads us to the type of work that we really wanted to highlight today for this talk, is integrating some of the executive function, working memory type training that we have been doing with the more narrow approach in a way in which we can integrate them in these broader activities that might also be engaging and liked by participants. And here is where these art-based interventions come into play. So visual arts, which is the focus of today's work talk, but there are also music-based intervention or other creative movement like yoga or storytelling, theater-based interventions that really afford the possibility to intently integrate some of these executive function type tasks that we're interested in, but also they inherently integrate or include some of these activities. And one example that was also the focus on of our work was music-based interventions. Yes, Masha, you can go to the next. Sorry about this. So the role of arts engagement, more specifically, or music interventions to improve cognitive aging and also prevent dementia or Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. So here's just the results of a broader meta-analysis that has been published a while ago that looked at various music type interventions in individuals with dementia, showing here that there's some parts that they show the high potential to improve cognitive functions in these individuals that are already diagnosed with dementia. And then the next part also interventions that focus more on visual arts similarly show improvements in cognitive domains. But the nice part about these types of more holistic interventions is that they don't only, in quotes unquote, seem to improve cognition, but they also have shown to impact more socio-emotional functioning, well-being, or mindfulness experiences of participants. So in that sense, they're much more broad in terms of their functioning as opposed to these more narrow brain-based cognitive interventions. And now for the next one. So the first study that was sponsored a few years ago by the Susanne Samueli Integrative Health Institute was an art-based interventions that was spearheaded by my, at that time, graduate student Ali Weaver, in which we looked at music-based interventions in which we very deliberately, again, integrated some of this executive function training that we're using and that will Masha will go into in her next intervention too. And this is just illustrating a little bit of the feasibility studies that we have done at UC Irvine. In the meantime, we transitioned on. We got subsequent funding from the NIH to continue this work. And we're currently in the prototyping phase using the app-based interventions that people can use at home. And if folks are interested to learn more about it, we'll be happy to talk more about this. So now that brings us to the next, really the focus of today's talk, which is the feasibility study. Masha, if you can go to the next slide, that focuses on drawing from observation. And I'll hand the word over to you from here.
Thank you, Susan. So yeah, I'll be talking about the study that we were doing with an arts-based intervention with older adults. Specifically, the type of visual art that I've been studying is drawing from observation. So looking at something that's out there in the real world and trying to recreate it as accurately as possible. And people with years of training are very good at the skill. But then people that don't have any past experiences or past training will not typically perform as well as people that do have this training. So kind of drawing more broadly can be conceptualized as a process consisting of multiple cognitive domains. First, there's this perceptual process of seeing what it is that you're looking at, trying to draw, and then there's the second stage of making the mental representation of what it is that you're trying to recreate. Then there's the psychomotor connection and the action of creating the drawing itself. And then a final stage of evaluation, so comparing your drawing to what it is that you're looking at and making kind of the necessary adjustments and going in the cycle continuously kind of as the drawing progresses. Some previous work, there's quite, I guess, an extensive body of work, mostly correlational with artists, looking at these different stages and seeing where artists might have an advantage compared to non-artists. So, for example, there have been recorded perceptual advantages in artists for a variety of different tasks. For example, disembedding figures, a task that involves attention, specifically global and local attention, and picking out small details in a complex scene. So artists tend to perform better in this task than non-artists. Here you can see an accuracy, but not at the expense of speed. And then also for other tasks like mental rotation, visuospatial reasoning more broadly, artists appear to perform higher in this domain as well. And this is something that Susan and I had looked at earlier. Before the pilot study, we looked at the differences between artists, and here we were looking at another artistic population that works in a different medium, specifically writers, and we gave them a series of different visuospatial tasks, and what we saw was that for a variety of different tasks, such as mental cutting and mental folding, artists were on average performing better than writers in this area. So highlighting that these visuospatial components of the process of drawing from observation really do relate to the cognitive processes kind of more broadly. But a lot of this work has been cross-sectional, correlational, and often more with younger adults. So something that I've been very interested in is actually seeing whether training in drawing and learning the skill, whether this is something that can have both cognitive benefits, but also, as Susan was talking earlier, benefits to well-being kind of more broader as well. So this is where the work for the pilot study begins. So I was interested in this idea of learning to draw. So I developed a course that taught people to draw through different techniques, and the audience was for older adults, and trying to see whether we can improve drawing skills, but also what kind of potential effects this could have outside of just drawing. So this was a feasibility study that followed a pre-test, post-test design where participants came into the lab for a one-day testing session where we tested their drawing skills, different areas of cognition such as executive function, and then those visuospatial tasks involving mentally manipulating objects, and then also some questionnaires on well-being, such as general well-being and mindfulness. And then in between the testing sessions, participants completed training at home between 5 to 10 weeks. And this was a waitlist controlled trial. So half of the participants were randomized into the training condition, and then the other half resumed their usual activities, and then they were offered the training after their post-test session. So these are the participants that completed the study. We ended up with 17 people in each of the groups, and these were adults in their mostly early 70s, a bit of a range, but also mostly females with a high level of education, a lot of people in the Southern California area, including some people from University Hills. And then we did see quite a significant dropout, but if you look at these a little bit closer, a lot of these dropouts were not directly related to the course, but more so, for example, health-related issues, not something that we do have much control over, and then things like time commitment, which could also be related to the population that we were working with as well. So now moving on to the course itself and what people were learning during their training. So during the training, there were two parts. So the first part is lessons that taught participants specific drawing techniques. So these are three of the techniques that participants learned, and all of these techniques come from past literature. So a lot of these techniques have been developed by art educators and have been recorded as ways to improve people's drawing skills. So the blind contour is a really famous drawing exercise that involves not looking at the paper when you're drawing. So you're only looking at the subject and you're working on syncing your hand and your eye together. The negative space drawing involves looking at the spaces around objects rather than the objects themselves. And then the gesture drawing is a drawing that's more drawing technique that's more focused on capturing the gist of something and using these quick movements to capture kind of the forms and the essence of the shape. So you can see all of these techniques are in a sense also related to different cognitive and visuospatial properties. So each week participants were learning a new technique, and also these examples that I'm showing here are all examples that were generated by the participants themselves. So they were learning these different techniques, and then they also were practicing. So they were learning the new techniques about once or twice a week, depending on if they were in the 5 or 10-week schedule. But then they were also practicing daily, using these specific prompts that they were given that were deliberately targeting different cognitive domains. So, for example, they were given prompts to focus their attention using these different techniques. So here's an example where they were asked to draw the same composition multiple times, and each time they draw it to focus their attention on a different property. So here they were learning the monocular cues, which is an aspect of vision and perception. So asking them to focus on these different parts of their perception. And then another domain that they were practicing, is visuospatial reasoning. So with visuospatial reasoning, for example, in this one prompt, they were asked to draw something as if it is transparent. So getting them to think about the space and the form of things and having them kind of reason through what they're seeing beyond just what they're looking at directly. So attention, visuospatial reasoning, and then two other domains that they practiced were processing speed and memory. So each time that they practice, they would choose a few of the prompts and they would deliberately engage cognition while also practicing these different techniques that they learned. So now moving on to some of the findings. So one of the main things we saw is that the techniques that people were learning were quite evidently facilitating the development of their drawing skills. So this is an example of a participant doing the blind contour exercise that I had talked about earlier, where you don't look at the paper when you're drawing. And these are 4 consecutive drawings of a participant's hand. So this is when they just first got introduced to the exercise. So you can see the first drawing, they're really not exactly sure what they're doing, but as they iterate and practice this a few times, by the time they get to this to the final drawing, they're really able to both look at these local spatial details as well as be able to grasp the bigger, more global picture of what they're looking at. So this development of the visuospatial skills is very much facilitated through these different techniques. And then looking at the numbers, so the pre and post-test data, they did a drawing task. So these are the results that we saw for the 2 groups. And we saw that there was quite a significant improvement in the treatment group's drawing skills. So these are the standardized Z-scores across the sample before and their performance before and after in the drawing task. So you can see in the control group, there really was not too much difference in their drawing skills, but for the treatment group, there was a quite large effect. And this is the net effect. It is quite large. And then here is an example of one participant. So this is one of the treatment group participants. This is their pre-test drawing. And then this is their post-test drawing. So you can see there's quite a big difference in how they're seeing object relationships and how they're able to translate this onto paper. And then, so the main goal of this was really feasibility and acceptability and being able to see whether participants are enjoying this course. Are they able to complete it with the goal of continuing further research on observational drawing interventions? So we did find that participants found the material that they were learning useful. So they mostly found the techniques that they learned to be clear. And then they also found those skill building exercises that they did with the different cognitive domains to be useful for developing their drawing skills. And then another thing we looked at is baseline correlation. So this is not pre and post test. This is all of the participants at the pre-test. And we were interested in looking at their drawing performance at baseline and seeing how that relates to different cognitive outcomes. So kind of like the correlational work that I had showed earlier. And what we saw, like in that correlational work before, that in this older adult sample, the better they are in drawing, the higher their spatial skills are. So they did 3 mental transformation tasks, and we created a composite Z-score, or sorry about that. Actually, this is one of the tasks. This is the mental folding, and this is the Z-score accuracy, and you can see there was quite a significant relationship even at baseline with how well somebody draws and their spatial skills. And then we also saw some emerging relationships as well in other domains, particularly in cognitive flexibility in the rule switch task. So on the y-axis here, we have reaction times. So you see the general trend is that as people's drawing skills improve, or not improve, sorry, as their drawing skills are better, they also tend to be quicker in cognitive flexibility types of tasks. And this is also in line with past literature showing that artists, a lot of what they do is kind of switching between the bigger picture and between the smaller details. There's a lot of switching that goes on as they're working. So we were able to see some of these trends in our baseline data as well. And then these are some of the actual effect sizes. So we mostly saw the largest effect sizes for drawing. And then because this was a feasibility study, the sample sizes were quite small. There's obviously some issues with not enough power to detect effects for these cognitive outcomes that do tend to be quite smaller than, say, for drawing. So that I think is more for future work, but we did see quite promising effects for drawing and then some of these well-being outcomes. And one that I do want to focus on more specifically is mindfulness. There was a mindfulness survey where we asked participants at pre and post test how they feel about drawing from observation and how it relates to different components of mindfulness. So we saw that comparing the treatment group and the control group, the treatment group had they felt that drawing from observation was quite significantly related to mindfulness at the post-test. And then also throughout the training, participants were doing daily reflections. And as they were doing these daily reflections, a lot of themes of mindfulness and kind of awareness of the present moment came about. So this one participant was talking about how they're starting to look at the outside world differently, starting to understand things like napkins and where the soft curves are, and really starting to better understand the cognitive process of seeing better. So this is what one of the participants was reporting throughout the intervention. And then another participant talked about how they find that they're now observing the contours of objects in their kitchen and by their desk, and they were even noticing a person's contour while watching TV last night, and they don't think they've ever done that before. So we're really seeing that as people are developing the skill, they're really starting to look at the world in a new way that is related to these components of mindfulness. And there's currently some additional analyses underway where we're looking at these different descriptions in closer depth and doing some qualitative analyses to pick out some of these specific components of mindfulness. And also we'll be looking at this domain in the future as well. So kind of to wrap things up, so this drawing-based intervention, the pilot study that we developed was very useful for developing the initial materials. So developing the materials that we know can teach people to draw from observation. So we were able to see that participants enjoyed the materials. They were able to improve their drawing skills. And now we're planning to take this further and to continue developing this. And one of the components that came up with some of the participants and is important kind of looking at interventional work with older adults more broadly is the social components, so seeing where we can include some social interaction between participants to improve both adherence to the intervention, but also to potentially improve effects and outcomes. And then also another component that I just want to highlight is kind of this idea of engagement and flow and kind of how this works with promoting deep learning. So as participants were working, they often found that kind of time would lose its meaning. They would be really immersed in the present moment when they're drawing. And a lot of this also interacted with the mindfulness. So kind of looking at this further and looking at this as a potential mediator of changes that we see at post-test. And then kind of some final notes. So one of the main trajectories in which we want to go in the future with arts, this intervention, also arts-based interventions more broadly, is looking at ways in which these interventions can affect modifiable risk factors of dementia. So it's known that almost 50%, so 45% of dementia cases are potentially modifiable by addressing multiple risk factors. So a lot of these risk factors are related to arts-based interventions. So for example, education and this cognitive stimulation component that we have been talking about throughout the talk. So these visual arts or arts-based interventions more broadly really help kind of this component, but then there's also some other modifiable risk factors such as depression. Arts are known to improve socio-emotional well-being, physical activity, getting people out and doing things, even with observational drawing. A lot of the drawings that they did asked them to go outside. So getting people up and moving, and then with music interventions, and then also with visual art-based interventions, these risk factors of hearing loss and visual loss can be potentially impacted through such interventions. And then also the social component that I had discussed on the previous slide with social isolation, and this risk factor can be modified through arts-based interventions as well. So kind of taking this holistic approach to health, modifying the risk factors, and trying to improve well-being and cognitive outcomes this way. And that's all that we have today. Thank you so much, and happy to now engage in some discussion.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. Please post your questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And as those are being populated, I'll take the first moderator question. So I love feasibility studies. I think they're really important. I also love the fact that the pilot study led to an NIA R61. That's just like the perfect aspect. So again, kudos to the Samueli pilot group because that really worked out well. Questions, again, these are just like thoughtful questions, so please take them with all the intent they're derived is this pilot work, Masha, was focused on you ended up enrolling highly educated, mostly women, and I'm curious what your next steps are because certainly as my work with integrative health and medicine, that tends to be a lot of what we do. We're really trying to get into a different space. So what are your next steps to kind of broaden that into a different category of participants?
Yeah, that's a great question, and also something I've been thinking about both while I was doing that study and then also moving forward. And so right now we're in Boston, and I would say Boston is a little bit more of a diverse place than Irvine in some ways. It's a lot more condensed as well. There's a lot of people in one space. One thing that I've been trying to do is a lot of outreach to community centers and then also like the YMCA in Boston and trying to engage older adults in the community that might not normally seek out such opportunities. So with the pilot study, a lot of our participants came from like mailing lists, so like the UCI mailing list, and then also some people that had expressed interest signing up in their studies in the past, but moving forward, I really do want to recruit participants directly from the community and kind of taking some different approaches. So, such as community centers, like I mentioned, the YMCA doing outreach there, but also even just putting up flyers in different neighborhoods and seeing whether we can engage some people that way. I haven't tried it myself yet, but even as I walk around the neighborhood where I live, which is pretty diverse in like age and also racial ethnic backgrounds, I do see sometimes flyers of people advertising like research studies there as well. So this is definitely something that is a priority, I would say, for the next stage. So before I finish my dissertation, I do plan to do another round of this and seeing whether we can increase the retention rate and also recruit a more diverse sample. Both having also more males enrolled and then also different levels of education, different racial ethnic backgrounds. So this is something I'm definitely focused on.
And one follow-up question, will you eventually look at like executive function as an outcome where like the mindfulness might be a moderator or what are you thinking? Just because I nailed that with like cognition and then this was focused more on just the drawing aspects. Will that be part of this? Is that a different kind of study? How can you help us learn about that?
Yeah, so at the pre and post test, we did include cognitive measures. We
Oh,
had some executive function measures. I guess I can, am I still sharing my screen?
you are.
You
I
are,
guess I
yeah.
can go back. Yeah, so these are kind of some of the outcomes that we were looking at. So we were looking at spatial skills, and then we also did have executive function. We had some of the classic tasks like the trail making task.
Yeah.
We had the Corsi blocks. This was a rule switch task where they were just clicking on shapes depending on two rules. So we did include these measures, but the sample was just so small that it was not possible to detect effects. But But definitely moving forward, we're going to continue including these different spatial and perceptual measures that we know are related to arts training from the correlational studies, but also including these executive function measures that have been used in our lab and also other labs that have looked at interventions. So this is definitely a component of it. It was not I guess it was a bit harder to look at it for the pilot study. We did still administer the tasks, and we were able to even find some correlations at baseline, as you can see here. But unfortunately, we were not able to look at any of the effects. But
Yep.
yeah, this is definitely the focus moving forward, in addition to questionnaires on well-being and mindfulness. But
Nice.
cognition, executive function, visuospatial reasoning are definitely the domains of
Nice.
interest.
Perfect.
And
Nicely
maybe,
done.
yeah, if I could just add on here. So the mediation approach that you mentioned too is definitely on our mind, because that's also what
Mhm.
we're doing with the earlier music study, really to figure out whether improvements in executive function could be the mediator that leads to mindful improvement in mindfulness, or vice versa, right? So once we have a
Exactly.
little bit more bigger sample sizes, that will allow us to look precisely at some of these relationships that we're very interested in.
Yeah,
Very
and actually,
cool.
I'll just add one quick thing. So, kind of towards the end, I brought up this idea of engagement and flow. And the reason I think that's very interesting is because I think it could be a potential mediator. So, the more somebody is immersed in what they're doing, the more actively engaged they are in it, the more they could potentially be seeing some of these improvements on these different cognitive outcomes. So, I think, yeah, it could be that maybe the engagement might be meeting the outcomes, or potentially these different cognitive changes could be mediating some of the other improvements as
Yep.
well.
That'll be super fun. That'll be really interesting. We have one question from
Mhm.
Barbara Marsh. What are the implications of your findings on the need for more arts-related socializing classes offered by UC and other community-based institutions? I know you guys have moved now, but writ large, could you talk about, environments, academic settings and how our role for how do we engage health and of our locality?
You want to start, Masha? I can add potentially.
Sure. Yeah. I think, well, universities can be a really great space of connecting community and research. So a lot of this work, it is pretty preliminary, but as we start to understand what kinds of things might be having positive outcomes, I think it is a really great space to start to bring together the community and the research and create the spaces for these types of classes. And also potentially having not just courses, but having people from the community come in to participate in like further research that can help us better understand what kind of outcomes this might have on cognition, and kind of combining the social component of the interactions between participants, and then also being able to look at these cognitive changes. I think that there's a lot of space here for connecting communities and extending on research from there as well.
And I can maybe add a little bit to that too. So I see, especially for now, the SSIHI, so the Susan Samueli Integrated Health Institute. So that can really provide some of these spaces, especially focusing on these art-based interventions. So observational drawing that Masha is doing is one, the music-based interventions that we do is another. And I know Barbara Marsh, who asked that question, is also interested in theater or maybe other types of interventions. And they have really shown big potential to not only in terms of promoting well-being and cognitive functions in these older adults who are engaged in them, but also the other part. I mean, they're fun to do. They're building community, and there are ways to provide means to build communities between researchers, the participants, and then also other people who are engaged in this space. So these are really great ways to do impactful work in something that can be life-changing for a lot of the individuals who are engaged.
Nice. I guess I should just take the opportunity. So I'm new to SSIHI. I've been here about a year. And one of the things that I was able to do bringing from Case Western was a music-based intervention. We have two different studies. One is music-based interventions, music therapy for sickle cell quality of life. It's a feasibility R01. But one that's actually more community-based is a NCCIH and NIA had funded 4 networks to understand the mechanisms underlying music-based interventions. And we're fortunate that I brought one from Case Western. So right now we're in the midst of assembling how do we move that. But one of the activities is bringing community members, musicians, other people interested. And we have on our website, the SSIHI website, there's an ensemble study. You can link on that and join the ensemble network, which again will build that community because we're starting to think about how do we engage again with community, because partly we can have all these great ideas in our institutions or hospitals or academic centers, and that's really not the goal. It's really to engage community. So I think you guys are on the right track. One quick question for you as well, and again, we have a few minutes. We're waiting for any more questions, but the notion that again, you're speaking to someone who had been trained as a neuroscientist 30 years ago now. So I studied learning and memory back in the day, and just thinking about those individuals who, in the drawing thing, Masha, so some folks are maybe more attentive to that, and some folks are more verbal. So they would do better on the list learning tests of learning and memory. And so, again, thinking of how do you match those styles of arts to match what kind of cognition you're looking for. Just thinking of how does that resonate with you, or you can call it silly. I'm okay with that too.
Oh yeah, I think that's obviously a great point. And I think there's kind of two things there. I think first is like different domains of arts will have different potential benefits on different cognitive areas. So yeah, if somebody wants to improve their spatial skills, then their visuospatial skills, then maybe a visual arts intervention would be best. If they want to improve their auditory skills, and music-based intervention would be best. So that's kind of one approach. But then also, if you think about people do just have different preferences of the types of art that they like. So people might naturally be more drawn to something related to visual arts or to theater or writing or music. So I would guess the people that enrolled in the study, because it was advertised as a visual arts study, it was something that they're already interested in learning more. So I think one thing I was kind of interested in moving forward, maybe sometime in advance, is doing an intervention where there's multiple arts-based intervention groups. So there's like one visual art group and one music group, and then the outcomes, it could be hypothesized that maybe the visual art will affect one part of the outcomes, the music would affect another part of the outcomes. It would kind of help test these different mechanisms through which these interventions can potentially impact cognition.
Sounds fun. Sounds like you'll be busy in the near future. How far are you away from your dissertation? Where are you in your process?
I'm a little bit over a year, so next spring is going to be
Your
my
comps? Yeah.
graduation.
Okay. Okay. Um, okay. I don't see any other questions. Again, I think people are just were excited by your report, the report, what you've been done over the years. We're sad to have you leave UCI, but certainly I had lived in Boston for 10 years, and I was at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. It's a great place. You're going to find a lot of fun there. So I think you'll find a lot of good participants. I did an aging study back in the day, and people are really interested. It's a very highly educated group too, but there's a lot of diversity. So I'm sure you'll have some great studies to do. Any last comments you guys have for us? Well, we have a couple minutes left to spare.
Thank you so much for having us, right? And we're always happy to report back. So we'll continue working in that space and if people are interested to reach out and also learn more about some of the still ongoing studies. So the music study is still ongoing. We have some other studies ongoing too, and we're always happy to get people involved, either as participants or collaborators or just interested folks who want to know more of what we do. We're happy to share.
Okay, great. Okay, I don't. Oh, there's one more question. Great. I delayed enough. Oops. So Barbara said, "Thank you for your stimulating presentation and the great findings." So she just wanted to note. Do you guys know each other? Is that something you know?
Yes, I
Oh,
know
okay.
Barb is one of our game night partners for a long time.
Ah, nice. Okay.
Gaming is
Well,
also good for cognition and aging, obviously. So that's always.
absolutely. So actually, I have a friend. So this is something, Sarah Lazarus at Mass General, and she's been studying meditation, and some of her studies on cognition, she used fMRI, but noting she'd done some studies with meditation versus Sudoku, and finding that the Sudoku didn't have as much impact on the cognition as you'd expect, but the meditation did. Again, just to point out that just noting all the fun that you can have in Boston. But any thoughts about that particular area? Just because this idea that I love games myself, so I was disappointed to see that. But noting, of course, everyone's different. But what do you think of that finding that I'm remembering now from a couple of years ago?
I mean, Sudoku kind of is very narrow. So the games I was mentioning earlier are a little bit more broad. So we play
Good,
a range of different
good.
board type games, right? Where I would expect there's a little bit more cognitive functions involved in
Nice.
broad functions, and also the social aspect, right? That Masha was highlighting. So that's definitely
Yeah.
very important. So there's some evidence that playing these broader board games can also impact cognition, and maybe that's a good thing to also say in the end. There's definitely no one size fits all, right? So that's what I tried to highlight earlier. So we really try to figure out what type of interventions might fit for a certain individual, and how can we select this based on baseline assessment, personality characteristics, or others, to really figure out what type of interventions is ideally suited to maximally benefit individuals as they are aging.
Wow. Sounds like Masha's gonna be busy in the future, as you, Susan.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Our team will email all registrants this link to a recorded session. We hope you can join us at the next research webinar, April 2025. Please look for an email to register or visit our homepage, link in the chat. Thank you again. See you next time, and everyone stay well. All right.
Thank you
Bye
much.
all. Bye.
Much.